This is taking a very heavy toll, with more than 1,500 homes already lost throughout the course of this fire season, which has been running since September of this year. From those first fires that I visited up in Canungra all those months through to most recently now. So our condolences to those who continue to suffer, and many of those who are left in absolutely disastrous situations as we speak. I also want to acknowledge the outstanding work that is being done by all of those who've been turning out and responding to these natural disasters, not just in the states currently impacted most dreadfully, in New South Wales and Victoria today, but also up in Queensland, across in Western Australia, down in Tasmania, even today, South Australia. This has been touching the entire country. The responses that have been led by our states has been extraordinary, and I want to commend all of the state premiers for their very close engagement with the Commonwealth, and particularly the premiers I want to thank for the close liaison they've had with me personally as we've been addressing the many issues that they are attending to as they lead those responses in each of their respective states. I also want to thank the various fire commissioners who have been working closely together, and particularly working closely together with Rob Cameron from the EMA, coordinating the responses across all the states and all the territories. They have been providing a constant stream of advice, not just now during the course of these fires, but as they do each and every day, 365 days a year, which is their job, to continually provide that advice both on preparations and planning, and of course now when we're in the very heat of the fire season itself. A state of disaster was declared and commenced yesterday in Victoria, and as well as there being a state of emergency declared in New South Wales, with very serious fires in South Australia, with further confirmed loss of life there just this morning, and as well as in Tasmania, there being serious fires there. Fires have also been in WA and of course in Queensland, where they continue to burn. In recent times, and particularly over the course of the balance of this week, we have seen this disaster escalate to an entirely new level. This length of season is, of course, in many senses unprecedented, but the ferocity and the absence of dousing rains that would normally bring a season like this under greater control is nowhere in sight. And so that means a much longer season is planned for. When I was in Victoria yesterday, one of the key points that was made to me, that the most difficult part of their season is typically usually ahead of them at this point, going through February. And so there is still a very long way to go. As a result of the lengthy nature of this season and the longer way to go, and the comprehensive application of these disasters in so many states, we have traditionally always acted on the posture of respond to requests in relation to the Commonwealth's action. And that is what we've been doing throughout the course of many months now, whether it's been the work that the Australian Defence Forces were doing in Canungra all of those months ago, through to most recently, the reactions we've had to income support, income loss payments that were made at the request of the New South Wales Government, and the many other requests for assistance with road clearing, or indeed the response that was made with the evacuation yesterday afternoon. We have been responding in relation to the requests that have been made by those state and territory governments. We now must move our posture as a Commonwealth, as we've agreed at the National Security Committee this morning, from a posture of respond to request to move forward and to integrate with the local response. This has been the very clear message that I have received on the many fire grounds and the many affected communities that I've visited now over some months, but I particularly must say over the last couple of weeks. The scale of the fires is stretching resources on the ground, and there are clearly communities that need additional help. And in response to that, we must move forward first as a Commonwealth, particularly with the work of our Defence Forces, and then integrate with the local operations that are in place in those local communities. And so today we are making a number of announcements in terms of what we will be doing to move into that move forward posturing. First of all, just around half an hour ago, the Governor-General signed off on the call-out of the Australian Defence Force Reserve to surge and bring every possible capability to bear by deploying Army Reserve brigades to fire-affected communities across Australia. I want to stress that the Australian Defence Forces have already been out there, as you saw in great measure yesterday in particular, through the evacuation work that you've seen through the work of the Chills. But I would say, as I've seen in many places, whether it has been on search and rescue, whether it's been surveilling the fire front and providing the planning and coordination information, whether it's been providing catering and accommodation support, clearing roads, our Defence Forces have been out there for many, many months. And what this means is we will be deploying those more on a move-forward basis and taking on these additional reserves, which are being called out as a result of the decision we've taken and authorised by the Governor-General today. A two-star Emergency ADF National Support Coordinator, Major General Justin Elwood, will have national authority over the ADF Joint Task Forces in each of the affected states, working in cooperation to support state emergency authorities. We already have 2 such task forces established in New South Wales and in Victoria. A third will be stood up for South Australia, but particularly focusing on Kangaroo Island at present, as well as to support what is occurring in Tasmania. And if further are needed, then further will be established based on what we believe to be the requirement on a move-forward basis in other states. The priority of this deployment is to assist ensuring the safety of life, to support the evacuation of affected people, particularly in isolated communities, and provide assistance to isolated communities and support state-managed evacuation centres. It is to move in and to move forward, particularly in areas that have been devastated by fire, to support the immediate response needs there and the recovery effort that will also follow. The ADF surge includes the deployment of up to 3,000 designated ADF reserve forces, and I will ask both MINDEF and the CDF to go into the details of where they will be placed. Secondly, the Hms Adelaide, the Navy's largest amphibious ship, has been readied to join the HMS Chills and the MV Sycamore in supporting evacuation of citizens from fire-affected areas along our coastline. The HMS Adelaide will sail from Sydney this afternoon, and I initiated that process earlier this week at the same time that we initiated the process with the Chills to do what they did so successfully yesterday. They will sail this afternoon. They will be located offshore from the fire-affected areas from tomorrow afternoon. The Adelaide is fully equipped, and I should say down in the border area between New South Wales and Victoria. The Adelaide is fully equipped for disaster relief and humanitarian aid and is able to operate all ADF helicopters, 400 crew including medical staff, as well as 300 tonnes which have been loaded up in recent days of emergency relief supplies. And the government has also ordered relevant ADF airlift and reconnaissance capacity to pre-position at the RAF East Sail Base, which will remain the central hub for defence response in the southern areas. From tomorrow, an additional 3 Chinook helicopters from Townsville will be deployed over the coming week to support a range of resupply, evacuation and transport tasks across the breadth of the affected areas. An additional C-17 Globemaster, 2 C-130 Hercules and 3 C-27 Spartans will also be pre-positioned to East Sail. And for people in short-term evacuation distress, Defence Force bases from Brisbane to Adelaide will provide temporary transit accommodation and support arrangements. The third area that was considered by the ADF today and by the NSC this morning was that following a request from the Australasian Fire and Emergency Service Authorities Council, which was made to us at 8 p.m. last evening, for 1 additional water bombing aircraft, today we have committed up to $20 million to lease 4 extra planes to fulfil that request and to meet any anticipated future requests. That will include 2 long-range fixed-wings DC-10s with 36,000 litres capacity and 2 medium-range fixed-wings large air tankers with an 11,000 litre capacity. The Commonwealth will fully fund the leasing costs, with operational costs to be shared with state and territories as usual as they seek to use those assets. They've asked for 1, we've given them 4. The government has already processed, I'd note, some 20,600 claims for assistance this bushfire season and delivered nearly $25 million in Australian government disaster recovery payment and disaster recovery allowances, as well as deployed mobile service centres and extended Centrelink phone hours, including opening them this weekend. But as with the floods and the drought, we can and will ensure communities and businesses have the help they need. I'll be making further announcements. The government will be standing up a national recovery agency along the lines of what we've already established for drought and for the response to the North Queensland floods, and I'll have more to say about that in the next few days about those arrangements. But today it is about ensuring we deal with the urgent crisis that is existing across fire grounds in 4 states in particular, to ensure that we're giving everything that is needed on the ground without being asked. We'll be turning up and we'll be integrating, particularly through the amazing work of our Defence Forces coming under an integrated command, which will be based here out of Jock, as it has been now for some time for their other operations. I want to end again by thanking the state premiers for their close cooperation and their support. I know where their focus is. My focus is in the same place. We are communicating regularly and constantly, and the fire chiefs and the other emergency services leaders are doing an outstanding job. But today it's about keeping safe, putting yourself in a position of safety wherever you can, following the instructions that are being provided to you, being patient and being understanding of the difficult situation that the country finds itself in responding at this time, given the absolutely comprehensive nature of this fire disaster, and to know that each and every hour of each and every day, governments at both state and federal levels, as well as a local level, are working hand in hand to ensure we can deliver the support and the resource that is needed to alleviate your very difficult situation. I'll ask MINDEF to make some comments, and also the CDF.
Well, Prime Minister, thank you very much. And I'd like to begin also by extending my condolences to all of those who have been impacted by these catastrophic fires. For those who've lost loved ones, for those who've lost their livelihood, their homes and their pets, I extend my condolences. Also want to add my thanks and my admiration to the amazing men and women of the bushfire services and also all other emergency services who are providing enormous service and sacrifice to our nation. But I also want to thank, in particular, our brilliant ADF for the work that they have been doing for the past 2 months. Over 2,000 regular and reserve members have been out across Australia supporting a wide variety of activities. We've had men and women from the Army, Air Force and Navy. They've been doing everything from damage assessments to fire surveillance and mapping, helicopter support, providing base support, catering, logistics, transport, accommodation and a wide variety of support. And so for that I'm very grateful, and I thank them for their efforts. 3 joint task forces are now operating in New South Wales, Victoria, as well as now in South Australia and Tasmania as of today, to provide command and control of ADF assets in those areas in this difficult time. And as the Prime Minister has said, they will be led by 2-star Major General Jake Elwood, who will be located at Jock in Bungendore with all the appropriate authorities. So what does this mean for the ADF? It means that as we ramp up further in support, our personnel and our military assets can be deployed in a timely manner, and also, as the Prime Minister has said, in a very forward-leaning arrangements with state and territories. But it also allows the ADF to remain very agile, and as events unfold, particularly as we see how events today and into the next few days occur, we can respond as quickly and agilely as possible. And also to support evacuees leaving the fire zones, Defence is providing temporary accommodation at bases, as the Prime Minister has said, between Brisbane and Adelaide, and that will continue. But the most significant announcement today is the call-out of the Army Reserves. At the Prime Minister's request early this morning, I signed an instrument requesting the Governor-General call out designated Army Reserve forces. This includes the 4th Brigade from Victoria, the 5th Brigade from New South Wales, and now the 9th Brigade from both South Australia and Tasmania, as well as reserve logistic elements from 17 Brigade, which is headquartered in New South Wales. And can I say the government has not taken this decision lightly, and in fact it is the first time that reserves have been called out in this way in living memory, and in fact I believe for the first time in our nation's history. In November last year, I requested that the Governor-General authorise a much smaller call-out of 20 reserve personnel for service in Queensland. And this was undertaken as a validation exercise in the event that we would need a much larger call-out in this bushfire season, which sadly now has come to pass. So with the Governor-General's concurrence in the last hour, the compulsory call-out will give the CDF the authority to direct reservists to perform continuous full-time service, to provide civil aid, humanitarian, medical, civil emergency and also disaster assistance. And this will be enhanced with specialist ADF personnel with wide-ranging skills including engineering, medical, logistics and also transport support. So building up over time from the next few days and weeks, as required, up to 3,000 reservists will increase Defence's footprint, and they will reach out to all fire-affected areas in coming days. The CDF's 4 key priorities for reservists under this call-out are, firstly, to provide isolated communities with life-saving supplies for immediate relief. Secondly, to provide evacuation to vulnerable people in isolated communities. Thirdly, assisting with assessment and reopening of vital roads. And fourthly, to assist fire services with preparation of fire breaks away from the fire fronts themselves. As I've previously said, at this stage we do have sufficient personnel between full-time and reservists who have been called for that are currently deployed. I've got to say, as a reservist myself, our nation's proud history of service, reservists have always performed a critical part in these call-outs for national disasters here in Australia and overseas, but it has always been on a voluntary or a called-for basis. So from today, reservists who are called out will be placed on compulsory continuous full-time service for the duration of the call-out order, which will remain in place until it is no longer needed. This means they will be supported in the same way as their permanent force colleagues, and their civilian employment or their day jobs will be protected under legislation. Many of our ADF reserves are already engaged in responding to these fires in many different ways. But I also need to make it very clear, and particularly to the reservists out there today who are looking at this action, is that for those reservists who are already engaged in the current emergency response will be exempt from this call-out. So that includes reservists who are already providing service in voluntary fire services, state fire and rescue, state and federal police, ambulance and emergency repair of power and communication company support, and also ancillary support to the Red Cross. So any reservists who find themselves, their family or their property under threat from fires, of course, will also be exempt from this call-out. And finally, on the call-out, any business that employs reservists subject to the call-out orders are eligible for financial remuneration under the Employer Support Payment Scheme if specific conditions are met. And for those who've got any questions on this today, there is a number that you can call. It is 1800-DEFENCE. So in conclusion, to the families of our Defence Force personnel, as well as all of those emergency services men and women fighting these fires, I thank you all very much for your service, and also for those of you in the communities who are supporting our ADF men and women out in the community. Particularly for families, your support for your loved ones in uniform makes their service possible. But I'd also like to thank the Prime Minister for his incredible leadership during this difficult time for our country, and also to Minister Littleproud. This has been a whole-of-government effort from the very start, and the cooperation at all levels of government, both federally and with state, has been outstanding. We are not out of this yet, but I want to assure all of you that this is what the ADF does best. They get on with the job and they do it really well. All Australians can be assured that the ADF is doing all it can to support our communities in this time of need, and I end on this point to say I'm incredibly proud to be the Minister of our ADF and see and know what they're doing. In fact, there is probably no prouder Minister for Defence anywhere in the world today. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Angus, General Campbell, would you like to add further to Linda's comments?
Prime Minister and Minister, thank you very much for both of your comments. And could I echo the acknowledgement, the respect and admiration that I and the ADF and colleagues in the Commonwealth feel for the efforts of emergency services, fire services and the leadership of states and territories throughout this bushfire crisis. The announcements today see a lift in our naval on-water presence with Hms Adelaide joining Choules and Sycamore, an increase in the number of aircraft and helicopters operating in affected areas involving Chinook helicopters, multi-role helicopters, light liaison helicopters, as well as P-8 surveillance aircraft, C-17, C-130 and C-27J transport and lift aircraft. Importantly, the approach of welcoming and opening for temporary transit and support our bases from Brisbane through to Adelaide is to assist those who are evacuating affected areas to return to home and loved ones where they can. The Minister and the Prime Minister have offered in some detail the call-out orders that have been issued. Major General Elwood will command 3 joint task forces and others if they are required, centred on New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia, Tasmania.